people who make their living out of cleaning murder scenes, accidents and the like. What is the worst thing you have experienced in your career? Dad had to saran wrap a guy's intestines back into his body once. Dude had surgery and pushed too hard on the toilet. Dude was fine, according to Dad, just holding himself together on the toilet while a group of firefighters tried to figure out why. TF, they were sent instead of paramedics. Update: when he pushed too hard he opened a scar on his torso, ab area, and it all fell out onto his lap. Should have mentioned this when I wrote the post. One that stuck with me was a suicide in a bathtub. We couldn't drain the tub, so had to use a coagulant, then scoop up the bloody mess into biohazard bags. Same for the toilet. Another was a suicide by gun in a basement full of boxes, which was a nightmare to clean, as even their smallest bit of flesh had to be found and cleaned up. The smell of the smallest piece of flesh meant the job wasn't done until it was found. One scene. The cops thought it would be helpful to put newspaper on top of the leftover melted body oils, which dried to the floors and was terrible to clean up. Sad cleaning up these things when family is in the other room as well. Not working the job anymore, but definitely gave me an appreciation for the hard work biohazard cleanup crews do. Mostly on call as well, so you never know how long you will be away from home. Edit. Another one that wasn't as gross but felt straight out of a horror movie trailer, where the person had squished what had to be thousands of pantry moths onto every wall. Living in pure filth.
Had to have had a mental condition.
Just really sad. Medic here. First responder to a motorcycle collision. Guy who crashed was a friend. He'd been torn in half and almost decapitated. Had to walk away from the scene and let my driver and another crew handle it. Think about it daily. I posted this on another thread, so just copy and pasted it, but this was one that I had to do. Clean up after a murder. It was a rehab house for ex-cons. 4-bedroom house with communal bathroom and kitchen. Sunday morning, and Guy A is in his room listening to music pretty loud. Guy B is in the kitchen cooking his breakfast. B knocks on A's door and tells him to turn it down. There's a small argument and B returns to his breakfast and A turns his music up. So B grabs the biggest knife in the kitchen, kicks in A's door and stabs him through his left shoulder, entering by his collarbone. A runs out of his room, across the landing, down the stairs, out the front door, back inside, back up the stairs and collapses on the landing. When I got there it was like a scene from a movie. Walls and ceilings, everywhere had been were caked with blood. Apparently after B stabbed him, he returned to cooking his breakfast. There was a half-eaten breakfast in the kitchen when I got there. Not a cleaner, but my brother's best friend is a police officer and I heard all about this horrible experience. My brother's friend took him on ride-alongs all the time. One day, they were responding to a welfare check. This guy's neighbor saw his apartment door cracked open for several days and called the police. They went to check it out and found a college student, 18 to 19, who had shot himself. The most disturbing part to my brother was that the kid had all of his belongings boxed up and labeled. He had letters written out and labeled for who they were supposed to go to. And he even went as far as laying out a tarp, and then putting heavy blankets over himself before he shot himself, as a courtesy to the people that would have to clean his remains.
This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision.
This was a very well thought out suicide, and the guy was obviously thinking about everyone who would have to deal with it too. So sad to imagine such a thoughtful person in so much pain that he meticulously orchestrated his suicide. My brother said the scene messed him up. Not because of the gore, but the lack thereof, because this guy so meticulously and thoughtfully offed himself. I worked for a restoration company, rarely cleaned up after dead bodies. And I got the only one during my tenure at the company. The lady had passed probably 2 weeks before anyone did a wellness check. So the entire room was contaminated. By the time I got there to do the cleaning, there were so many dead flies and maggots on the floor, it was truly shocking. We rolled the carpet and carpet pad up that was in the room, and all of the dead bugs sounded like a rain stick you get in a cheap tourist shop. That sound sticks with me after 3 years. When I was a bartender, a couple of clients told me the worst part about the job is cleaning melted bodies. I don't know the science behind that, but from what I understand is if a body stays for a while in a certain condition of temperature and humidity, it melts, and those guys have to remove that person's remains in buckets. I work in the I was told by someone that works for a funeral home that they had to go get a girl that had overdosed and passed away. They said she had her breasts augmented and was pregnant. Turns out she overdosed while taking a bath and had decomposed enough that her breast implants and the fetus were floating around in the water. Then I clocked out and had lunch. Not me, but my mother was a firefighter, EMT, for a long time. She always told me some crazy stories. There are 2 that have always stuck with me. The first, 2 men whose families didn't accept their relationship and it weighed on them so badly that they decided to take their own lives. They attempted this by getting in a tub, taking some drugs, and then using a power saw to saw off each other's arms and bleed out the direction they cut. However, didn't make them bleed out as they had wished. And then they were left with one arm uncut and no arm to cut it. My mother told me it was such a bizarre scene to walk in on that she still doesn't believe it was real. The second, they responded to a death a few days after a man had died in his hot tub. Multiple days in the extremely hot water. When my mother and her partner went to pull him out, he had basically boiled alive and all the meat on his body just slid off the bone. Edit. Thanks for the awards. Bonus story for ya. My mother once ran a call where a man had died in his house and wasn't found until a few days later. When she and her crew arrived, they had found that the man's cats, having been without food for days, ended up eating the man. With us having cats, the sight of a man whose face had been devoured by blood-soaked cats just absolutely freaked her out. Friend of mine does this. His worst was an elderly woman who died in a bath. Skin falls off like long-cooked meat. So he just saw piles of skin, flesh. Goddamn, just writing this makes me gag. I had a great uncle who helped clean up the bodies left behind by Hurricane Audrey in 1957, and he said that the smell persisted in his nose for weeks after. It got so bad that he went to the doctor to see if they could do anything, and they clipped all of his nose hairs and the smell went away. It was explained to him that the smell had soaked into the hair, but I don't claim to know the validity of that statement. The hurricane hit South Louisiana in June of that year, and most of the bodies recovered were found in the saltwater marshes that cover the area. So it's safe to assume that they were in an advanced state of decay. I've heard it said that the smell of the decomposing bodies was so bad that the alligators would actively avoid the areas, but I don't know the validity of that either. I'm not a crime scene cleaner, but we used to transport coroner cases as a part of our job. The elderly man who blew his head off with a shotgun in a third-story attic in the summer was rough. He'd been there a few weeks. We could smell him when we got out of the truck at the street.
Blood spatter covered every inch of the walls in that room.
As did the flies. Had to scrape some dried brain off the floor into a container for the coroner. When I went to roll him into a body bag, his bloated, slimy greenish-blue skin slipped off of him and I was left holding a large sheet of it with both hands. The worst part was his wife had passed a few weeks before. They had been one of those married for 60 years. Inseparable couples. He just couldn't take it. That broke my heart. Other guys were puking. I cried silently.